And a lot of royal watchers were surprised, to say the least, to see Meghan Markle pop up at the Balenciaga fashion show. Now, Rebecca, this was a significant moment for Meghan, wasn't it? Significant appearance.
It was a significant moment.
I heard you calling.
Paris sells you the dream first. The river light, the perfume in the night air, the velvet hush right before the cameras burst open like lightning. And then, if it wants to, it takes the dream back. That was the mood as Balenciaga's show throbbed to life. Chrome catwalk, baseline heartbeat, a room full of faces famous enough to be their own weather systems. And there she was, Meghan Markle, stepping into the frame like a script had finally swung in her favor. Hair sharp, lines cleaner than a blade, fabric that swallowed light and returned it as a shimmer. The choreography of a comeback felt planned down to the breath. For months the whispers said this moment was circled on her calendar in ink. Paris as reset. Paris as redemption. After a run of stateside coolness, the wine project that inspired more memes than buyers, Netflix concepts that stalled, a press corps that never met a shrug it didn't overanalyze, this was supposed to be the pivot. A European re-entry in a house that prides itself on drama without apology. The thesis was simple, not retreat, return. Where the crown you picked, not the one they gave you, it began with the precision of a military operation. Arrival timed to catch the crest of the cameras. A dress whose weight promised seriousness, whose sheen promised wear-back sparkle. A smile set to warm, not melt. A posture that said, I know you're watching, and that's the point. Then the tiny tells, the ones fans explain away, and enemies screen grab. The smile that held a fraction too long. A palm smoothing the fabric twice when once would do. A glance toward her team that wasn't looking for approval so much as gravity. Behind the runway curtain, the politics were the kind that can cut quietly. Invitations were real, hierarchies, even more so. The front row is a map of power, and maps never lie. Names that live on billboards found their spots within breath distance of the creative director. Other names, still marquee, still magnetic, were slotted back just far enough for a lens to call it perspective rather than a snub. You could call it a seating chart. You could also call it a sentence. Stylists murmured about the dress. Too literal, too heavy, too something for a brand that enjoys the menace of restraint. Socialites traded eyebrow raises as if they were currency. Demna glided past a hurricane of hellos. Some got the double kiss, some got the nod. The nod is respectful, yes. The nod can also bruise. The show's pulse climbed. Models sliced the air. A cinema-scale montage bled onto the arena screens. Balenciaga's Rebel Reel, a collage of riotous chic and women who broke molds and made headlines pay for it. Then, as if the edit belonged to a different film spliced into this one, there was Meghan at a pivot point. The exit from Buckingham's orbit in 2020, a tabloid scream about division, a flash from the Oprah era that burned like magnesium. It wasn't a hit piece, it was context. Disruption dressed as a tribute. But context lands differently when the room is quiet and the camera is not. For a heartbeat, everything in her face loosened. The public version flickered and the private one surfaced. Unmasked, unarmored, unmistakable. Her hand tightened around the clutch. A whisper to her handler, the kind you don't need to hear to understand. Then the waterline rose. Not a sob, not theatrics, just the all-too-human moment when control slides a half-inch out of reach. The lens was merciless in the way only a perfectly framed shot can be. 10 seconds later the internet had its loop. 10 minutes later it had its caption. An hour after that it had its verdict. On one side came the tenderness. She's human. Anyone would crack. Grief tastes different in rooms that pretend to be kind. On the other came the knives. Paris doesn't pity. Paris measures. If your brand is composure, losing yours is a headline that writes itself. The British tabs feasted, body language clinics, pixel-by-pixel breakdowns of a trembling lip, dissertations on an exit taken at speed. The American glossies opted for euphemism, an emotional evening, a layered response, a complicated reintroduction, because Americans love a comeback and hate a mess, and this was both. Backstage sounded like a storm trapped in an elevator shaft. A door shut and stage shut. A phone call with the cadence of someone trying to hold a dam with bare hands. The security murmur that says we're leaving and means it. She slipped out before the finale walk, dignity gathered with the hem, a tight corridor of handlers making shape around her. Of course the camera found that too. The mascara shadow, the phone clutched like a passport, the I'm fine tilt that only fools the person wearing it. 20 million views, do not ask permission, BY morning. The spin cycle was at full tilt. A statement fashioned with the vocabulary of modern virtue, resilience, scrutiny, empowerment. A suggestion that the montage honored women who absorb the world's glare and give back grace. Some nodded. Many didn't. Timing can smell like sincerity or strategy. The crowd decided it smelled like the latter. Elsewhere, a softer rumor traced a different outline, a pre-show argument over footage rights, a tug-of-war between platform and person, an artist's terror of being remixed in a narrative she didn't script. If true, the montage was just the weight on top of a load already cracking. What no one could miss was the symbolism. A woman who has fought, relentlessly, to curate her frame was forced to watch another frame define her, and she watched it from the middle of the room built to judge. The gasp was not for a dress. It was for a mirror that refused to flatter. The deals that once fell like fruit now require ladders. The press that once wrote epics now writes autopsies. The circles that once competed to host now confer and consider. Magic, like capital, likes momentum. When it stalls, interest compounds in reverse. The brand's feed stayed studiously neutral.
No reposts. No congratulations.
A silence that sounded like policy. A few names who had normally flood a night like this with selfies kept their edits on ice. Plans that were meant to cascade. A Vogue sit-down, a tie-in campaign, a tease for a next chapter, suddenly found the calendar full of maybe later. Meanwhile, TikTok did what TikTok does. Slowed the moment down, set it to strings, then to EDM, then to comedy. She wanted Paris to remember her as an icon. One caption read, "Paris remembered her as a person." In Montecito, the official word was quiet. Unofficially, the chorus said reassess.
Step back.
Choose rooms with softer edges. Pick moments that let you breathe. The harsher version framed it as a collision. Hollywood's appetite for spectacle meeting royalty's appetite for control, and both refusing to yield. A society biographer put it colder. Control the narrative long enough and the narrative develops a taste for controlling you, and yet beneath the clatter, beneath the schadenfreude and the sympathy and the industry gossip, there's a simpler truth. Armor works until it doesn't. Even professionals at the top of the image economy are still made of the same soft machinery everyone else carries around. Tears don't ask for clearance. They arrive. They announce. They end arguments you thought you were winning. Paris became the city of tears not because a duchess cried, but because a room designed to applaud the flawless had to watch a very public proof that flawless is a costume with a short battery life. By afternoon the city had moved on, as it always does, to another show, another stage, another set of names arranged like jewels in a case. The clip, however, kept traveling. Into feeds and group chats and Sunday panels. Into the hands of people who feel vindicated and people who feel protective and people who feel nothing except the familiar thrill of proximity to a fall. That's the paradox. The moment will fade, and it will also last. Not for what she wore or who she greeted or where she sat, but for the instant a woman who lives by the camera looked straight into it and could not, for once, bend it to her will. Maybe that's not a failure. Maybe it's a price. Maybe it's a warning, too, about what happens when you try to be the lesson and the legend at the same time. She went to prove she still had reach, that the myth still had heat, that grace could be manufactured on command. Instead, the city peeled back the lacquer and left the truth exposed, ambition with its hands shaking, poise with its edges showing, a story that couldn't be edited fast enough to save the scene. And somewhere, in a quiet room far from the runway, someone who has spent years learning how to survive the spotlight had to ask the oldest question in fame. What do you do when the light tells the story you don't want told?